sometimes people put a lot of attention or a lot of importance to work-life balance early on in their career. I think to be productive in the long term, you should actually not care about work-life balance in the first 5-7 years, because that would mean you will learn skills so much faster, those skills will compound, and your ability to do more in less time would rapidly increase. So I think lower work-life balance early on leads to better productivity later on and better work-life balance.
All right, welcome back to the pod. Today, again, we're rolling with all the requests that we are getting from our readers and our listeners on things they want to learn. So today's episode is about how to be more productive without burning out. But before I begin this episode, I want to address the bullshit that's out there around productivity. I think a lot of folks like to pretend that they're working 80 hours a week, nonstop, 7 days a week. And while that's true for, you can do that in sprints, I doubt anyone's been doing that across a whole decade. So right off the bat, Hassan, I'm going to put some pressure on you. Have you been working 80 hours a week nonstop for the past 30 years?
No, 100% not. Definitely not.
Yeah, I think, we work in sort of I would say, tech is sort of, like a high performance sector in terms of there's a lot of high performance people, a lot of high performance companies. So I think a lot of people maybe exaggerate how long they work. I don't know if some people work 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week. I just think that happens more in sprints.
No, I think that's true. I think there is something to be said that some people are able to sustain for longer that type of output, and maybe what a sprint may mean for someone a month or a week, for some people may mean 3-6 months, maybe even a year. But I think there's a time period when you're able to put out that much effort and output, and then you need some sort of pause and reset for your body and your mind to be able to go again on that. So I think obviously for everyone that sprint timeline could be different, but fully agree with that perspective that, you can't expect someone to just say hey, I started my career at 22 doing this, and I'm 34, 35 now, or whatever age you are. I've been doing this every day, 6 days a week. That would be pretty crazy to me.
Yeah, 100% agreed, right? So on one hand, I think there's this reality that you can't really work that much for a very extended period of time. But I think on the other hand, there's another reality is that some people are really way more productive than others, right? So I think the classical example is someone like Elon Musk, who's running $4 or $5 billion companies. Clearly, he's able to be more productive than most people. You and I know a lot of people who are running multiple companies successfully. You and I run 2 companies, right? So we've got the media company and then we've got the tech company. So we're running both of those companies together. So I would say, not to sort of pat ourselves on the back or anything, but we've been able to become more productive over time without burning out, at least at this point. I think we've been through some stages where we've burned out, but we don't really hit that level of burnout anymore. So I thought, today I'd sit down, I'd pick your brain and you can pick my brain on what is it that we're doing in our life to be able to be more productive, but not burn out. How does that sound?
Yeah, man, I'm very excited. I think I have some stories where I think I was at peak of my productivity, and then there were times when I was just pretty bad, and then came out of that. So yeah, very excited to share those stories. And I totally agree with you, right? At the end of the day, it's not hey, we are experts of productivity. We're just sharing with you what has worked for us. When did it work? When did it not work? What did we learn from it? And then hopefully, you can kind of leverage those skills, because we are working in high intense environments, those lessons and skills to kind of improve your productivity levels.
Supercharge your startup with Google Cloud. Ready to take your startup to the next level? The Google for Startups Cloud program offers $350,000 in free credit, expert guidance, and cutting-edge AI tools. Don't miss this opportunity. Apply now at cloud.google.com/startup/apply.
Is there any particular event or story that sticks out in your mind that you'd like to start with?
There are 2 which come to mind, right? I think one is a negative one to some extent, and another one is a positive one. So 3 years ago, I think I was pretty at peak of my productivity. And there are a few reasons for that, which I think worked out really well. And I think today, true as well, I'm trying to actually get back into those habits and adopt them myself. So first of all, I think which really worked for me was hey, I was working out every other day. So then if you remember when you were roommates, you got me into the workout. Yeah. I was following a very regular workout at home. I was not going to the gym, but just I had some free weights, 30 to 45 minutes every other day. Some of the basic exercises we used to do together, I would just continuously do that. That just used to energize me again, right? So I had started my work at 8, 9 a.m. I'm doing workout like 5, 6 p.m. It would just give me a burst of energy, allowed me to do that extra 4, 5 hours of work in the later part of the day. I think that was a huge energy amplifier. I think another thing which used to help me, and I started doing again as well, is in the afternoons after lunch, taking like a 30 to 45-minute walk. So not just like a random walk, I would still be on a work call or something like that, but something which allowed me to like walk, and that would allow me to kind of maintain my sugar levels and like just not crash after lunch. Used to find that really helpful. I would do like some 1 to 1.5 hours standing work, desk work, which allowed me to stretch. I think mobility just used to improve stiffness and levels. Those things were really helpful. I used to maintain a high protein diet, do intermittent fasting, used to help me with like not being foggy and things. So combination of these things allowed me to be productive. I also used to sleep almost 6 to 8 hours every day almost. Like typically when I used to get 7 to 8, very good. 6, slightly low productivity. But overall sleep is very highly critical. But at the end of the day, I think these things combined would allow me to be super productive. I would be able to deliver 12 to 16 hours of work almost every day, 6 days a week, and still feel good. I would still go for social activities or the weekend, you know. And now coming to the other story, I think over the last year, I did not do these things. All the things I just talked about, I did not do. I clearly saw my productivity drop by almost 50% in the first half of the year when I stopped doing these things. And that was like a huge, massive, light bulb moment, because I thought like I was just doing these things. Hey, I was feeling good, but I did not realize how much impact these things were having on my productivity, especially the working out, the walking piece, and the stretching piece. I think were like huge game changer. Like that amplifier of energy and like not crashing after having like meals was insanely critical. But those are kind of like two stories I wanted to share with people, because a lot of people I think like think about, hey man, maybe these guys are like super intense, build like so many startups, they're productive all the time. So it's not true. I was in a pretty low productivity point, and it just feels negative, right? Like you're just not delivering a lot of value, but you can get out of that.
Yeah, 100%. I think when I listen to everything you've talked about, the one that sticks out to me most is 8 hours of sleep. At least 7 hours of sleep, I'd say, right? I think you can outrun most things. I think you can probably outrun a bad diet when it comes to productivity. You can sometimes even outrun bad posture, other things, but I think it's really hard to outrun lack of sleep. I see a lot of people, sleeping 4 hours a night and then trying to compensate with coffee. But the reality is like you're completely brain dead, and the coffee just keeps you barely awake, just enough to be productive. And I find that, if I've had 7, 8 hours of sleep, I am way more productive than if I hadn't gotten that and just, took a bunch of stimulants to keep myself awake. Has that been the case for you as well?
No, man, like poor sleep means you can spend 12 hours at the office, but most probably 1/3 productivity. Good quality sleep, those 12 hours are the 3x worth. So I will say like never sacrifice your sleep. Maybe you can get by one day because you have like, obviously people's genomics or genes are different, but I feel whenever I have bad sleep, my productivity easily falls by 3x. It's a night and day difference.
So, we've covered the basics around like health. I think a lot of people would have guessed that's like common sense, but let's like, dive deeper into something, more specific tactics. The first one that I want to address, at least for myself, is, why do you get burned out? Because you do things that burn you out, right? So I think you need to pay attention to things that give you energy and things that drain energy, right? So for example, I'm the kind of person where, I love sort of, being at my desk and writing, working, creating things, but meetings drain me out, right? So first of all, one thing that I did is I try to eliminate meetings as much as possible for me. And when I do have meetings, I tend to have them later on in the day, like in the evenings and the nights, definitely not in the morning, right? Because morning, I'm high energy. I want to make sure that I focus on the most important stuff. And then evenings, later on in the afternoons, that's when I'll do most of my calls because they drain energy for me. So number one, I think focus on things that give you energy, eliminate things that drain your energy. And in cases where you can't get rid of these things, everyone needs to be in some meetings, I guess everyone needs to do a little amount of work that doesn't give them any energy, better to do them later on in the day or later on in the week if possible, so you can conserve as much as your kind of high energy time, high focus time, and give it to things that give you energy or give it to things that are more important.
Yeah, I'll actually like love to pick up on one thing you mentioned, right? Which I think is super critical in productivity approaches, self-awareness, right? Like you talked about, you know that you are not productive when you take meetings and you do a lot of calls. Some people may feel still productive. So I think it's also critical to know like when you're in the high energy zone of your time, like maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's night, whatever that time is, what is the most critical activity you should like focus on? Because that will also enable to like amplify your confidence, amplify your productivity overall for the rest of the day. I think a second thing I then like picked up as you were kind of talking about the meetings, which I think has worked really well for me from a productivity perspective, is that I have a meeting decision matrix. So meeting decision matrix, what does that mean? A meeting decision matrix says, what is the goal of the meeting? Why are we doing it? If I cannot answer these two questions, in most cases that's a pointless meeting. So a lot of meetings I think can be solved by a simple message or an email. And just filling your day with meetings is like the most negative thing to do to your productivity. I think the third thing I would say, as you kind of like talked about, those day scheduling, because we do a lot of context switching. We're working on a media company, an app company. I like to have like day or time blocks. So in a certain part of the day, I'm working on a very specific thing, and maybe I'm ignoring two other things, and I'm aware of that. But I'm not trying to do like, hey, every 30 minutes, let me like go between one task and the other task, which are completely different. I think that also like fries your brain a bit and impacts your productivity. So if you are working on multiple things or multiple tasks, which are not fully connected and you need to kind of focus on something, just have a time block. Maybe it's 1 hour in the day, maybe it's half the day, maybe it's a full day, whatever that is. A time block is super critical. And it has really helped me ensure that I can deliver good quality work.
Yeah, I think you've touched on two other interesting things, which sort of like are practices for me. Number one, I think most people don't realize this, but deciding what I need to do next is serious context switching and actually takes up a lot of brain power, right? So imagine you don't plan in this at the start of the day. Let's just say you start your day by whatever the first task is on your mind, right? So then between that and the next task, you then need to sit down again and be like, okay, what's the next thing I need to do? What's most important? What's due next? That process takes up a lot of mental energy. And if, let's just say you're doing 5, maybe 10 tasks a day, you need to go through that very intense mental process 5 to 10 times a day. So that is a very significant form of mental energy tax and context switching that most people just do multiple times a day, which can be avoided, right? And the way to avoid it is simple. Just at the start of your day, write down what the most 3 or 4 or 5 important things are that you need to get done that day. Put it in your calendar in rough time blocks, and then get into it. Second thing here, I think, is around batching stuff, right? I think, Hassan, you talked about, we're working across 2 companies. So, certain tasks we need to sort of, do at the same time just to make sure that we're conserving a lot of energy. So I think this is where batching certain tasks come in, right? So for example, me, I create a lot of content, whether that's for the newsletter, for the app company, whether that's ads, whether that's this podcast. A lot of my work is like content creation. So what I often do is I will have certain days in the week where I focus only on content creation, right? Another task that I need to do pretty much every day is deal with communication and deal with email. So for example, what I'll do is I'll just deal with emails twice. So I'll deal with emails at the start of my day, and I'll deal with emails, maybe 2 hours before I'm done with my day. Like that's basically what my rough schedule is for dealing with emails, Slack messages, and other kinds of communication. You might have other kinds of tasks, right? Whatever that batching looks like for you based on priority, the type of task, the amount of time that's going to take, or the nature of the task, I think that can really help you feel a lot less strained, right? So for example, if I'm just responding to emails, good. I know for the next 30 minutes, I'm doing nothing but responding to emails, right? So I can just get there, focus on emails, and then I can move on to my next task. So I think batching is the second point that I wanted to really focus on is, if you have certain type of tasks, just try to batch them on certain days or within certain hours of a particular day so you can just deal with them with peace of mind without having to go back and forth.
Yeah, no, I think that's like even more like deeper from like a time block perspective, right? Like actually I've been A/B testing this thing personally for me of seeing like, hey, how these things improve my ability is that. So, at the start of the week, I'll make a checklist of things. Every day I would make a checklist of things and I would have some tasks on that. The day I complete all of those tasks, I feel so good that I go into the next day feeling so pumped, and my productivity even is better. So one thing I've learned is that if you do these things, what Zain was mentioning, your confidence level will start going up. Like, hey, I got things done, and I was able to deliver, X amount of stuff by the end of the day. It's actually really helpful for that as well, because the next day then you go with that momentum, things are better. And even if when I missed maybe 20% things on my list, I still feel good because I actually had this list going into the day, and like 80% got done. And the day, as I was saying, I was doing A/B testing. Some days I don't have this list. Actually, by the end of the day, even if I got done a lot of stuff, which to someone else would be like, holy shit, man, you got all this done in a day. I'm like, yeah, man, like, I don't know, like maybe I could have done more, because at the start of the day, I didn't really have a list. So I found like, following what Zain just explained, like batching things, having a checklist, going through it has been super helpful for my productivity and also for my confidence to be productive on a daily basis.
Fuel your startup's growth with Google Cloud. Join the 90% of GenAI unicorns that trust Google Cloud. Get up to $350,000 in credits, access to cutting-edge AI tools, and expert guidance when you join. But why Google Cloud? Because they offer personalized support from experienced mentors, technical training to upskill your team, and a vibrant startup community to connect with like-minded founders. Ready to take the next step? Visit cloud.google.com/startup/apply to learn more and apply today.
Next tip or hack that I want to share, and this has been a huge one for me, is just delegation, right? I think everyone knows what delegation is. You give that work to someone else and so on and so forth. But I think the way that that delegation is usually done is you give low priority tasks to someone else. What I want to do is link this up to what I said earlier in this conversation, and that's basically you should also be delegating low energy tasks to someone else, right? So in some cases, you're a manager, you're running a company, whatever that is, and you are able to delegate. But a lot of times you aren't actually able to delegate. Let's just say you work solo or you're at an entry-level position at a company, you can't delegate. That was not an option until now, right? So today, you actually can, thanks to offshore hiring, email, Slack, Zoom, all these different things, you actually can hire someone offshore. If you're hiring someone part-time, could be as little as $300 or $400 to handle a bunch of work for you, right? I have a full-time assistant. I think she gets paid somewhere around $1,000, which, by the way, if you're in the US and you're listening, you're like, oh my God, $1,000, that's so little. But for someone who's living in the Philippines or a similar country, $1,000 is actually a lot of money. And in some cases, gets you like an upper middle class lifestyle. So it's a win-win for them. It's a win-win for me, right? That's awesome. So I think you really should think about delegating to other folks. So my assistant, for example, saves me about 20 to 30 hours a week. So, a very specific example is this podcast. When we record this podcast, me and Hassan, our work is done here, right? She will take this podcast recording. She'll make sure that she works with the producers to get this podcast ready. She'll make sure she works with them to make sure that it gets posted on time. Then she'll go work with our video editor and make sure that we get all the short clips that we go post on social media. And then she'll make sure that she gets something ready that I can go post on my socials and that we go post in the newsletter. That alone right there is about 5 to 10 hours a week of work. So this podcast could not have happened unless I had delegated that work to someone else, right? And a lot of this work, by the way, is not only less important. So for example, finding the right time to schedule or posting the story in the newsletter is a little bit low priority than actually recording this. And second, it's also low energy. I am not big on coordinating and being in meetings. She takes care of all those things for me, and she loves doing that. She loves being organized. She loves being coordinated. So it's a huge help for me. So it helps me, do that. And it helps me and Hassan focus on the most important piece of this podcast, which is preparing and researching for this podcast, and then coming here to record. If Hassan and I were spending 10 hours a week doing all this other stuff, I'm pretty sure both of us would have been exhausted. So one huge tip that I wanted to give you is, if possible, if you can't spend a few $100s on hiring an assistant and delegating these tasks to them, please do it. Even if you're in a job and they're not part of the company and there's, stuff that's not sensitive that you can delegate to them, you should be doing this, right? And this is part, we started this podcast by saying, how is Elon Musk so productive and running all these companies? Because he has delegated work to thousands of the smartest people in the world at these companies. Every day, he just looks at what the most important thing is that needs to be dealt with any of the companies, and then he focuses on solving that one problem instead of being caught up in the day-to-day of every company, right? So I think that's a great example of what delegation can really do for you. Hassan, how do you feel about that? Are you big on delegation, or do you feel like I've oversold delegation there?
No, I think at the end of the day, right, like there's so many tasks in the day which you would like to do. And most probably as you move up in your career, like some of those tasks can be delegated and free your time because, it's 24 hours in the day. It's not like you will be able to fill everything up. And as you move up in your career, more tasks or more critical things get added. So you need to figure out a way to like build a system for delegating something. Otherwise, it will be really hard to be productive because you will always be overwhelmed. So I totally agree with you. Another thing I would add, which I think is super critical from a productivity perspective, is also thinking about sometimes people put a lot of attention or a lot of importance to work-life balance early on in their career. I think to be productive in the long term, you should actually not care about work-life balance in the first 5, 7 years because that would mean you will learn skills so much faster, those skills will compound, and your ability to do more in less time would rapidly increase. So I think lower work-life balance early on leads to better productivity later on and better work-life balance. So I think that's another thing I would add as well as we kind of talk about delegation.
I guess that's a little bit of a controversial opinion on our end, but I think, if you're young, if you're in your 20s, if you're unmarried, if you don't have any kids, like, please, like, you should be spending as much time as you can being productive, being working, getting ahead, and making sure that you're making your 30s, 40s, 50s easier for yourself, right? Let's just draw a thread from there. A lot of folks who are listening to this are probably going to say, hey, all of this sounds cool, but I've got a spouse, I've got kids. How do I stay productive if I have a spouse, if I have kids? So, Hassan and I are both married. Hassan does have a child, actually. So I'll hand it over to you, Hassan, right? So you've got a baby. I guess she's just over a year old, very demanding at this point. I guess, probably keeps you guys up at night. Yeah. Probably needs a lot of attention at this point. So as a parent, right, can you talk a little bit about how having a baby has impacted your productivity? And then how have you managed to stay productive while obviously also making time for your daughter?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people ask this question to me on productivity as a parent. They think like, hey, like productivity is going to go down. So I'll first say like short three things, which I think have been very critical to ensure that to get productivity. First, you cannot keep a set schedule and you have to be flexible to do deep work or quick work at different times in the day. I think the second thing is you really need a supportive partner who understands the sense of urgency and the importance of the work you have. So you can balance it off because sometimes she may need help, you may need help. So you really need like that support and collaboration system. And the third thing would be you really need to make the most of your time in the day. If you're sitting in the car and traveling in an Uber, respond to those emails. If you are, like just going on a walk, try to take a call. You really need to like figure out how to have some hacks to try to start combining two things together to like get more productivity. So that's kind of like the short and quick answer. I think overall, to be honest, the first few months were really hard. Sleep was pretty miserable. Overall, it was hard to like operate. And, I was fortunate enough that I was able to take a break, spend time with my daughter in the first 6 months and like not really like need to worry about work. So that's like a very privileged position. But as I started getting back into like building a company, I really had to think about like, hey, what are like the times in the day where I can do deep, uninterrupted work? And what are the times in the day when I really just cannot do deep and uninterrupted work? And I really need to prioritize other things from which are not work. And that kind of like type of flexibility and scheduling allowed me to like get back to my productivity, also feel like, hey, I'm able to like get stuff done in a more meaningful way. Also, we have support as well. Like, like we have a nanny, which also helps because my wife is now back to work as well. That has been super helpful. But overall, I think like the key thing is that when you're spending time with your daughter, like when I'm spending time with my daughter, I'm focused on her. I'm giving her attention. That's a mental break for me as well. I'm not on my phone, not responding to an email. I'm not looking to TV. I'm just out for a walk, playing in the park. Very good mental reliever. So instead, maybe like before my break would be, hey, let's go watch something on Netflix. Let's go for a walk. But now I'm just spending time with my daughter. So I think like, as I said, right, like combining those things together has been really helpful. A lot of people say like, hey, struggle with productivity. I feel, as I've talked to folks, is, hey, like, their social life gets affected. You can't really go out that much, which is like true, right? Like you really need to like then cut back on some of your social life so you can like prioritize your family and like your work. So some things have to be given up as you have a kid. But I think overall from a productivity perspective, I feel my daughter actually has made me more productive now because at the start of the episode, as mentioned, My fitness levels are a bit down. I'm not eating the most healthy diet. So I'm trying to get back into that. But actually having a daughter and being so much more about like, yeah, we really need to spend time with her every day makes me squeeze the most out of my time, most amount of work out of my time when I have the time to work. I'll just add like, right, like I remember like when I moved to like the valley when I was 22, and we all used to live like in a hacker house, 6 of us building a company. Very different, right? Like we would sleep, wake up, have a daily stand up, work throughout the day, have dinner together, sleep again, start the day again, 7 days a week almost. So obviously our productivity levels were much different than like what mine are today. But there were a lot of things we were learning. We were pretty new due to that work. So I think there's something to be said about that. When you're early in your career, I didn't really care about work-life balance, but that type of intensity of like 7 days a week, living with my co-founders, living with like folks who are building the company, allowed me to learn a lot. That today, when I need some time to spend time with like other things, my productivity has not drastically gone down. So I think that's where like that work-life balance point I was saying was very beneficial for me from that perspective.
I think, my productivity definitely struggled a lot once I got married, and in ways that I didn't expect, right? So I sort of, came in with a very selfish perspective, which was, hey, I'm working hard so I can build a future for my family. So my spouse should, be okay with me working 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, so on, and working on weekends and not sort of like, expect me to take too much time off or so on. But one thing that I realized with time, your actions signal your priorities. And if you consistently prioritize your work over your spouse or your family, the reality of the situation just is it's like you value your work over your family. Like there's just no other way to put it, unfortunately, right? So I think, there's, just, a hard realization around that. So the way that I've learned to deal with this, everyone will have their own ways of dealing with it. That this is just what's worked for me over time is make sure that you are creating dedicated time in your week to spend with your spouse. Right. And this is not a one directional thing. You can't just go to your spouse and be like, hey, I'm free from like 2 to 4 p.m. on like, Tuesday afternoon. Not like that. Not like you're putting them in your calendar. I think it needs to be a time that they're excited to spend with you as well. Right. So, for example, if your, spouse likes going on walks with you, then you should probably schedule a time for you guys to go on walks every day. Find something, needs to be a consultative process about what you guys like doing together. Me and my wife, we just like to, unwind by just watching some Netflix. So, we'll often do that before bed. But then, on weekends or something, we definitely like to go out for walks. We'll go out to the park. We'll do small picnics, things like those. We like planning outdoor activities for the weekends. Even today, my wife's parents are coming over after I'm recording this podcast. So I moved my meeting, to later on. Could have been a shitty husband and said, you know what, got these super important meetings, wouldn't be able to be there, so on. But I think, you really have to, if you have a wife, if you have kids, you really need to be there for them. And you really need to create your schedule in a way where they know that they are the priority when they need to be the priority.
So I fully agree with you, right? Like I think if you have a good partner, they will understand like what are your priorities at a certain point in your time, life, whatever like you're trying to approach. Because at the end of the day, you're a team. You need to collaborate together. You need to understand each other's needs and what works for them, what works for you, and you have to like find that balance. And whatever that balance is, sometimes it will be leaning one side, another side, but you need to like collaborate and work together. And it was a process, right? Like learning about those things. But I think like the biggest thing which has worked well is being able to communicate, like, hey, what do you need and what the other person needs is super important. Second is that like people understanding those needs. And thirdly, like, just being supportive.
I think that's a selfish lie about productivity. I think you and I both know a lot of people who are very productive, but they're also very shit husbands. And eventually a lot of them end up getting divorces and stuff as well. And the lie is something like this, which is basically, I'm working hard because I want to build a future for my family, but then I'm not going to give my family any time for the next 10 years, which doesn't make any sense. And then 10 years down the line, your spouse leaves you, you end up getting a divorce, your kids end up messed up, or your kids don't want to talk to you. And then, your life is basically ruined, right? So yeah, I think that's a short-term selfish, but long-term very harmful lie that a lot of people tell themselves about productivity. And I think especially in hustle culture, it's like, oh, I spend all my weekend working, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, cool for, shareholder value, but, congratulations on destroying your family. So, I think you definitely need to be aware that this narrative, like, oh, I'm working hard for my family, even though I'm not giving them a few hours, even a few hours a week, I think that's extremely selfish. I think that's extremely destructive. So I think you have to hold yourself accountable to, being productive, but most importantly, spending time with your family as well. Cool. If you made it until this part of the podcast, just a quick summary for you, just to recap everything. So first of all, good productivity starts with good health. Make sure you're getting your full 8 hours of sleep, that you are on a healthy diet, that you're not too stressed out all the time. I think all those things make you more productive over time. Second thing I'll say, we talked about very specific tactics that you can do. So for example, batching tasks, focusing on your energy, trying to delegate, all these, kind of tactics definitely make you more productive over time. And then the final thing, we talked about is around family and relationships. If you are at that stage of your life where you have a wife, if you have kids, then it's, you can't just selfishly prioritize your entire work around your own energy, your own time, your own preferences. I think you need to have some kind of compromise. And I think you need to find, a way with both your kids and with your spouse of making sure that they are the priority and then scheduling your work around those things. Thanks so much for joining us for today. If you like this podcast, let me know, Zain at Superhuman.ai. That's Zain at Superhuman.ai. If you have a particular topic that you'd like us to talk about, hit us up on that email. Let us know what you think, and we'll be down to talk about it next week. Thanks again so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.